So, welcome to everyone to this edition of Europe Calling. Europe Calling is about bringing people closer to European decision making without moving to another place. People through the internet can discuss directly with those who make decisions. Today, I have a special guest, Tsakalotos. He joins us from Athens, the Greek Minister of Finance. I'm very honored that he accepted to join us. I've seen in the registrations that we had a lot of interest, mainly from two countries, from Germany and from Greece. So this will also be a certain form of citizens' encounter through the internet. These sort of debates we should have much more, rather than the Greek discussing about the Germans or the Germans discussing about the Greek and repeating prejudices. We should discuss in Europe much more often directly with each other. This is also the reason why we have that event, and we also have options for you then to join the debate, which this is really about. This is not about the two of us discussing. We can do this in Brussels from time to time. I've enjoyed meeting Minister Tsakalotos several times, and this today is for you in order to raise your questions, to make your points, and therefore you have several opportunities. So you can either raise your hand with the hand function at the control panel, and then I, after some time, will give you the floor, and I ask you to ask short and sharp questions or remarks, and always, of course, respecting a respectful tone, which should be normal in Europe in all public debates. Also, you can type in a written question, which I will then read later, time after time. And lastly, for all those who have difficulties with English, although I can already announce that the Scottish accent of Mr. Tsakalotos is very easy to understand, at least in comparison to many Germans speaking English. And therefore, I hope that most will do without, but if you need translation, there is a link sent to the chat function, and that link allows you to follow the German written translation. And I thank already now the person who does it, and that is from Düsseldorf and Cologne, Tasha, and she will help us with the translation. So now I would like to start this edition of Europe Calling, which is the 16th edition, and I would like to ask the Minister a very simple question, which is one which strikes me all the time. Whomever you ask in Brussels, people have not a lot negative to say about you. So you join the ministers like Mr. Schäuble and Le Maire and many other colleagues in the Eurogroup regularly. Other Greek ministers of finance in the past from different party backgrounds, they were generally said quite unpopular there. You managed to become popular in the Eurogroup. There are lots of critical questions asked about the Eurogroup not being transparent. You do not know who took what decision. How did you manage to get popular in the Eurogroup? I'm very curious to hear your answer.
Well, to be flippant for a moment, it hasn't done my left-wing reputation much good, all this popularity. But to be serious, I think what the Greek government did after the September 2015 election is to split up our policy into three baskets. The first basket was what we agreed to do within the program with our creditors. The second basket was what was left a grey area within the program, which needed negotiations and needed clarifications, and there we negotiated very hard. And then there was a third basket of things we would do outside the program, and we've done very many radical and progressive things, including giving more rights to transgender people, to making progress with the prison reform, education reform, and so on. But I think that I have some credibility with other Eurogroup ministers, because once we reached an agreement on the first and the second basket, we kept our side of the bargain. So I think They don't have to like me, they don't have to agree with me on the policy issues, a disagreement, but they know that if we reach an agreement, it's a done deal. There's sort of like a golden handshake, if I can use that phrase. And I think that is quite important. Once you've made an agreement, to stick to that agreement. You can argue before and try to reach a compromise, but when the agreement is made, try to keep to it. And I think not just myself, but other ministers of this government have tried to keep to the commitments we've made.
One thing which I found striking when I was last in Athens, and perhaps you could explain that a bit more, is that you are now really starting or have done a lot in order to go after large-scale tax evasion cases. You have a database, which I would love the German tax administration would run, which allows you to keep better track of large-scale transfers of money outside of Greece and compare that with the tax declarations. Could you explain a bit what you did now to go after money which went to Switzerland and other tax haven countries, how successful you were, and how the cooperation with the German authorities worked? Because I'm from North Rhine-Westphalia, so we are quite proud of what we have been doing, but I must say I saw a few things in Athens which I think nobody else in Europe is doing. So could you explain that a bit?
Yes, I mean, first I would like to thank a number of people from Germany who have given their advice freely and have been very helpful in this process. I think that we had a situation in Greece where before the crisis, more or less rich people paid their taxes on a voluntary basis. And if you see the years before the crisis, whereas we were spending roughly the same, the average of the European Union GDP expenditure as a percentage of GDP, on the revenue side, we had a big shortfall compared to other European countries. So what do you need to get rich people to have to pay their taxes? You need a stick and a carrot. So the carrot is, if you come forward, we might forgive some penalties, but you have to pay some of the tax you would have paid if you kept your money in Greece. Now, you were referring more to the stick, not to the carrot. And what is the stick? That we had a program, a software program, which we developed within the ministry. I'm very proud that it was done within the ministry. Previous governments spent a lot of money outsourcing such programs to the private sector, paying a lot of money for programs that did not work. So what does this program, what does it do, this program? Let's say we find Sven, who has 1 million euros in his bank account. And then we find that in the last 10 years, he's declared income of 20,000 euros a year. What this program does is it matches those two. So if you've got 20,000 declared taxable income a year and you've got a bank account of 1 million, there's a prima facie case that is something wrong. Now that used to take us 9 months to be able to do that matching program. Now with this program, we can do it in 5 minutes. Obviously then Sven or Euclid or whoever it is, it needs to have the time to explain, no, it's not like that, I wasn't, I had other non-declarable income and the law didn't allow me not to declare it, so it's not clear that you're guilty or I'm guilty, but at least those 3 months cannot be condensed so much, but the previous 9 months can be condensed to 5 minutes, and that's already paying dividends. One of the reasons why we've had an overperformance on our primary fiscal surplus target is because we are expecting to get about 600 to 700 million this year from the voluntary disclosure initiative of people bringing back money. You've had such programs in Germany as well, but they wouldn't bring that money back. They wouldn't declare it unless there was a credible threat that we know that you have this anomaly between your bank deposits and your previous tax returns. So I'm happy to speak to German ministers or from the lender level, not necessarily at the federal level, who would be interested in our work, and we can send some people to share that information. I think it's very important for Europe Although I've been sometimes disappointed about Eurogroup and ECOFIN discussions, at least there's a beginning of a movement on this serious issue of tax avoidance and tax evasion, and there is serious discussion about how we can address this issue.
I would remind participants, please raise your hand if you want to use the opportunity to ask your questions. I will ask one more of my questions and then start reading the written questions and giving the floor to those who lifted their hand. So look, how many people you could catch through this program? You said how much money you got by the voluntary disclosure, but how many people were you able to catch, and which use could you make of the data which was provided by the North Rhine-Westphalian, the French, and also the German tax authorities? So there was a long debate about the famous Lagarde list and whether it was complete or not, and whether it was used or not, or whether there were legal obstacles to use it. So how useful was this truly for you? And one thing I can already say, as you know, you received an invitation to the European Parliament, also on our suggestion to be able to present these measures, of which I truly believe that other European states could learn from that database. So in Germany, we not even have a consolidated database between all the federal tax administrations, which causes problems itself. So you are clearly advanced in this regard. So, but how much could you really gain from the database itself?
Well, we can gain a lot from now onwards because the program is up and running. We have a problem with the Greek courts who have a statute of limitations how far back we can go. So that's a bit unfortunate. So we consider that the big party, in inverted commas, of tax evasion was in the years around the Olympic Games and so on, 2002, 2000 to 2008, before the crisis. Unfortunately, the courts don't allow us to go that far back. That is one of our problems. Otherwise, we would have a lot more. The courts argue, I mean, of course, the courts are independent and you have to respect their judgment, that the further back you go, the more difficult it is to prove something in the court that they were guilty. And at the same time, it is true, to be fair, that the collectability of investigations reduces the further back you go. But given that constraint, which we're working within that constraints of the Greek courts, we're trying to increase the number. And of course, the lists were very important in this. And I think one of the reasons that Syriza and the new government came into power in January 2015 is that people were outraged with all the sacrifices the Greek people had to suffer. We lost 25% of our GDP, which is an astronomical number. I don't know how people can understand it in real terms. It's never happened before outside wartime. Greek people felt that, you know, we weren't in the same boat. There was one rule for the one and another rule for the other. And I think that those lists and the fact that we were willing to investigate them were very important in our project. And it's a very important project because fairness and is crucial to any policy. If people feel that they are being victimized and somebody else is getting off scot-free, then it's very difficult to convince people that you're going in the right direction.
Okay, I would like to give the floor now to the first citizen. So it's Lorenz Burkhardt. Let's see what he wants to say. Lorenz, you have the floor.
Good evening. Greetings from Kiel in Germany. My question depends more on the expectations of Syriza when you were elected. So we heard in Germany, as left-wing people, we heard that in Greece, the hospitals had no more and not enough money, and so on. The investment was going down in the crisis, and now you have the opportunity to gain more taxes and to come on to get on the track. But I'm asking, when will you start to do more investments and to what do you think? When is the crisis over? So when can people be sure that not only when is the crisis over? Yeah.
Okay, thank you for
Euclid.
Yes, thank you for that question, Lawrence. I don't know if I pronounced the name right. It's the most important question for Greek people. We are now in the last stages of the program. The program with our creditors finishes in the late August of 2018. The economy is turning round. When we come out of the program, we will, of course, have monitoring from the Eurogroup and the European semester and post-program surveillance. But I think Greek people will feel that they've turned a page, that now there is there might be more surveillance on the targets, of which we've agreed with our creditors, but will be much more degrees of freedom of how you achieve those targets. And that's really important. On the other side, which you asked about the investment, the key issue is that investors are beginning to see that there is a clear runway. Unfortunately, the way Europe works hasn't helped Greece, because if you keep postponing decisions, if you keep saying we'll make the important decisions about Greece in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, then a rational investor is obviously going to say, well, okay, I'll postpone my investment decision. Yes, if Greek debt relief, or I don't know when they're going out of the program, then I can't make an honest decision, a sensible, not an honest decision, a sensible decision on whether to invest. What we're hoping for now is that we're going to have finished this third review. This is the third review of the structural adjustment program, the ESM program. We will have a final review, but we will be making discussions about the nature of the exit, and also we will be making discussions about the debt relief, clarifying those measures that were decided in June 2017 in the Eurogroup. And when the investors have that clarity, I'm sure there will be a lot of investment. Whenever I speak to investors, there is a great deal of interest in Greece. I think they are actually convinced that some of the reforms within the structural adjustment program, which were reforms that everybody should have been supporting. We've already discussed a little bit about tax evasion, but also it was making the public administration more effective, more transparent. We're now going to have a much more professional public administration. These reforms are important, which, whether you're left or right wing, that they're important to give investors the comfort that Greece is not going back to the model of 2009, where the public administration was very politicized in the bad sense. What do I mean by politicized in the bad sense? Interventions on day-to-day work. What do I mean politicized in the good sense? Is being able to discuss with public officials policy issues and exchange views. We've tried to keep that baby while throwing away the bathwater of the intervention in the old political style of Greece over the last 40 years.
Yeah. Thank you. I have another question from, now it's getting difficult, Christina Efimiatou. I really excuse my pronunciation. Please, Christina, from Athens. Christina?
She didn't recognize her name.
That is probable. Christina? Well, perhaps you need to switch on your microphone. No, that doesn't work, but let us see. Perhaps she is later able. Ah, now, Christina, please. No. Okay, that doesn't work. We try later again. We have also Nikolai Nikolov, who wants to raise a question.
Hello, do you hear me now?
Yes, now we hear you.
Okay, good evening. First of all, thanks for the interesting topic, and I wanted to ask the Mr. Tsakalotos. So recently, the Commission proposed the new package on the EMU, which was the kind of a big thing of the year, containing also certain proposals on the European Stability Mechanism, which is has been quite relevant for Greece in the last year. So I wanted to ask you if you can share how you're feeling about the future direction of the ESM and the crisis prevention measures. Thanks.
Just one question, Nikolai. Where are you from? And yeah,
I'm from Bulgaria.
Ah, okay. Please.
Okay, it's a very important year, I think, 2008 for Europe. I think there is a general recognition that the European economic and financial architecture needs to change if it's not to break. And so there's a lot of proposals. The good news is that for the first time, a lot of issues are being discussed. Nikolai said about changing the ESM into a European Monetary Fund. There's a discussion about how fast we can proceed on banking union, including EDIS, which EDIS is the European Deposit Insurance Scheme. If you're in Texas in America and your deposits are protected by the federal government, not by Texas, that's another issue. There's an issue to do whether Europe needs some stabilization mechanisms, such as all other monetary unions have, Australia, United States, Canada. There is a discussion whether there should be greater investments in European public goods. So the good news is that we're discussing these issues. The less good news, let me put it like that, not to say bad news, is it's unclear how much northern countries and neoliberal politicians are willing to support this agenda. So it's going to be a very interesting 2018. I think there'll be a discussion on all of these issues, and finally a package will be agreed. I think the Chancellor Merkel is interested in engaging in this topic, and I think if the Social Democrats also pressurize, and if they are in the government, we'll have to see what happens to that. I think that we could have some changes in the right direction. I think the left that I represent, but also the Greens and some sections of social democracy, apart from the economic proposals themselves, should be addressing the issue about the accountability and the democracy of those measures. In other words, how I see it is that Europe is unpopular in certain sections of the European population, not only because there is social inequality and regional inequality, but people don't have a sense that they can actually influence the political decisions. You, Sven, made a reference to the transparency of the Eurogroup at the beginning of this discussion, that European citizens don't have a feeling that they can intervene or can understand or can be consulted. So I think whatever reform is done, it must have at least the same amount of democracy and accountability as is the existing setup, and preferably much more. So, for instance, I would be against a greater role of the ESM becoming a European Monetary Fund unless this was accompanied with a greater amount of accountability in how the European Monetary Fund works. So that it's not just a technocratic economic issue. Do we need more investments? Do we need a stabilization policy? How fast we can move with banking union? It's also, in my opinion, a very important democratic issue.
May I ask you a question from a German perspective on this? How do you feel that in the ESM, if 3 countries have a veto right, which is France, Germany, and Italy, because all major decisions have to be made with 85% voting share, which gives 3 countries a veto, while everybody else doesn't enjoy that veto right. Don't you think this is inherently unfair?
I think if the ESM is transposed into a European Monetary Fund, those are exactly the issues that have to be discussed. I think that the Commission, there might be problems about the transparency of the Commission, but compared with intergovernmental institutions like the ESM, it has a lot more transparency. It does report to the European Parliament more. So I would see a very important role for the Commission within the European Monetary Fund. What we don't want is European citizens to think that we have a European Monetary Fund which is like the IMF and is not so amenable to democratic accountability. I mean, this goes for a lot of the European institutions. For instance, the Federal Bank of America, the Federal Reserve, sorry, the Federal Reserve has a lot more accountability to Congress than the ECB does to the European Parliament. And I think that there are important issues of democracy across the board to be discussed. And I think the Greens and the left and the Social Democrats, especially those Social Democrats who are beginning to see that that they have to change to a more progressive direction, I think this is an important agenda which can increase the popularity of progressive forces in Europe.
I would only like to stress that, of course, the European Parliament should have more oversight over already the European Stability Mechanism as it is, and even more so when it's moved to a European Monetary Fund. At the same time, I have to say the ECB is more accountable to the European Parliament than the Bundesbank was ever to the Bundestag. So, and advancing that accountability would, of course, be welcome. I see another question from a citizen linking well to some of these issues. So here's Mr. Wettach, Wolfgang Wettach, welcome from Tübingen, which is in Baden-Württemberg in Germany. And he asked the following: how does the minister feel about the attempts of the European Commission to micromanage details of Greek policy? And does he think Greece can counter such wishes better with a new economic or performed economic outlook?
I think there has been an issue about micromanagement. The European institutions have intervened in every detail of policy, and sometimes that has led to bad legislation because they don't understand the Greek legal framework and so on. I think that was also an issue of trust. Sometimes previous governments agreed something and then implemented something differently. I think there is also, every institution likes to have a control of the situation, but I think as we move out of it's a natural institutional tendency. I think anybody who's been involved in any big organization knows that. It's not something special to European institutions. But I think as we move forward in 2018, given the improved performance of the economy and given the enhanced credibility, I think this will be a smaller problem, not least because it was a very front-loaded program. So front-loaded means that most of the reforms are already behind us. So I think the issue wasn't as important. It won't be as important as it is now. I should just say that and give some credit to the European Court of Auditors, who actually does audit the Commission on that. They asked for information. I made some of my complaints to them. They made a very sensible report about that, and I think that is another institution that to link the two questions that can help. I wrote a paper to them about the degree of micromanagement in the program, and I think that the European Court of Auditors should be given some credit for the work that they've done.
Yeah, I would like to say that the report was not very welcome with all political groups in the European Parliament, but it is a really interesting read. And I would also like to stress that this report deserves much more public attention because it's many of the lessons learned from the mismanagement of the programs were pinpointed really by that report. I have to say it's quite a shame that the ECB did not cooperate effectively with the European Court of Auditors and is still denying proper access to their material. I have now another question from Nathalie Revi. Let's see whether this works. Nathalie, you have the floor.
Yes, hello, Mr. Tsakalotos. I want to ask, I'm Greek and I live in Germany, and I would like to go back home. So which is the inducement for Greek people to come back home and help the country to get worth to live in again? It seems so difficult with the high taxes and yeah, it seems everything so difficult. Could you give me an answer,
Natalie, may I
please?
ask you a question first? How is it to live in Germany? How is it to live with us?
It's not bad at all. I'm half German, actually.
Ah, so you.
But I have a house in Greece, and I would love to live there with my husband, with my friend.
Oh, okay, it's a very fair question. Any country that loses 25% of its GDP is in a difficult situation. We've tried to improve things. We have got, for certain sections, especially middle-class people, too high taxes. Other people are not paying enough taxes. But let me say why we've got too high taxes to certain sections of the population. When we came to the government, we had two priorities. One was addressing the humanitarian crisis. So we've done a lot for social solidarity, for money for the hospitals, for money for the hospitals to be able to treat people who were uninsured, who had no insurance whatsoever. So that was a big drain on our ability to reduce taxes for the kind of people that Natalie presumably is thinking. On the other hand, this thing we discussed earlier about tax evasion, it took us time, because tax evasion and doing the program is not something you just press a button and say people now pay their taxes. You have to be prepared. But what we have been doing now is, because the economy is doing better, we've got fiscal space, and in fact in our 5-year program for the next 5 years, the medium-term fiscal strategy, we have 3.5 billion put aside for reducing taxes for people like Natalie to find it more attractive. On the other hand, we are doing programs. I don't know if Natalie's age and whether she has children or she's a student or whatever she does. We're beginning to do a lot of programs for Greek people who have got degrees and masters and PhDs to return to Greece, or to be able to have one foot in Greece and one foot in Germany or Britain or France whatsoever, so that they keep contact, we can exchange information. So we are trying to do that. We're also doing something that's very important. The structural adjustment money that Europeans share out in Greece up to now has been too much concentrated in large infrastructural projects. We've changed that for two reasons, both for environmental reasons and for ecological reasons, but also because we think that Greece is a country with lots of small and medium-sized enterprises. And so a lot of the money now is going for those kind of initiatives, and a lot of young people, I'm glad to say, are taking up that opportunity. So, you know, we have lots of initiatives from young people to set up their business and to be able. So I hope that over the years that the economy, we are returning to growth. We're going to have growth this year, next year, the year after that, but also these micro measures will be an inducement for people like Natalie to return to the country.
Okay, thank you.
There's another question related to the tax debate we were having, and that is a debate which caught a lot of public attention in Germany. The large ship owners were at least, or are constitutionally, to say, protected to pay taxes. How do you see this? How has it developed? Are they now paying? What is their legal status now? This was raised by, I don't want to hide it, by someone who asked very early on, just to make that transparent. And then, just a moment. Yes, Johannes Dieling asked that question, please.
It's a fair question. As Johannes says, the Greek ship owners are protected by the Greek constitution, so there is a constraint there. It's for historical reasons. Greece was a diaspora country with lots of emigration, and shipping was very important. So at that time when the constitution was made, it was thought important that they're given protection so that they can return money to Greece and so on. We have been in discussion with the DG Com, the Margarita Verstager, who has been pressurizing to change this negotiation, this framework, and we've been negotiating with the Greek ship owners. And I think over the next 2 or 3 months, we will see a sort of a compromise, which is a fair compromise for the ship owners to be paying a bit more for the Greek economy and as Greek taxpayers, and at the same time that the constitutional issue will be decided when we have a constitutional parliament.
A constitutional parliament, what's this? Not everybody might understand.
No, of course not. Quite right to point out. In Greece, to change the constitution, you have to declare the current parliament a constitutional parliament, and they have to be voted in the next parliament as well. So for the measure to pass, whatever it is, it has to pass 2 parliaments. So if this year, the Alexis Tsipras, who has suggested that he might open a make it a constitutional parliament, whatever measure is voted on in this parliament will also have to be ratified in the next parliament. So it's not a separate assembly like a constitutional assembly. It's the ordinary parliament, but it has to be declared that it's going to have a constitutional change, and that has to be ratified in the subsequent parliament.
Sounds like the Bermuda Triangle of the German government, the first chamber and the second chamber, but everybody has his and her own areas of trouble. So I have now a written question of Christina, who actually wrote the question on behalf of whom you certainly know, Yorgos Dimaras, who is the Green Minister of member of the Parliament on the Syriza list, but from the Green Party in Greece, and he is asking the following: which of the Green policies you consider critical for the exit of Greece for the crisis, and the same applies to Europe? And if I may add one question to this, which also raised a few concerns in Germany. Obviously, our 2 countries have something in common. Both countries rest in their power provision a lot on lignite, which is the dirtiest of all forms of power production. The only difference is obviously that Germany is economically in best shape ever and should really get out of the lignite as soon as possible. Greece also continues to be invested in that area. So if he's asking about green policies, is there a plan for the government at least to reduce the use of lignite in Greece?
It's an important question. I come from a left-wing section of my party which is called the Red Green, so I am particularly sensitive, and I've always thought that that is a very important meeting point. So as you would understand, in the structural adjustment program, the 4 institutions are not particularly interested in environmental issues. So this was always part of the 3rd basket, if you remember how I separated things within the program and without the program. We still do rely on lignites, but the Ministry of Energy has, in its discussion both with DG Com on the monopoly position of the PPC, which is the public power company, has made a very big shift to move to renewable sources of energy. That is a really important plank. The second minister in that ministry is also from the Green Party. So no, actually he's not. He's now gone to the agricultural area, but we can come to that, because obviously agricultural development also has a very important agenda in Greece in green issues. So he's pushing organic farming and so on. So the one issue is about energy and moving to alternative programs, sources of energy, and there's been a lot of work done on that. I think in previous governments there was also some concern about that, but it was too focused on one or two areas. I think now that the current leadership of the Ministry of Energy is actually spreading its agenda to what kind of sources we can use and how to become an energy hub without being a dirty energy hub. As I said, there are other initiatives to do with the Ministry of Agricultural Production, where there is a Green Minister involved and who's very interested in pushing organic farming and the quality of production in the agricultural sector. There is also issues to do about Greece, since Ottoman times, has not really had a clear demarcation of areas of Greece and their purpose. So where can you do industrial production? Where is an agricultural sector? Where is a touristic sector? And the Ministry of the Energy and Environment has actually been working that. And I think that's going to be very, very important for future investments. And so we have made clear that the difference between our government and the right-wing opposition is, of course, we're open to investments, but we really do want investments that are both environmentally friendly, but also are increase the value added produced in Greece, that use the skill base in Greece, or upgrade the skill base or the technological know-how there. But the environmental questions are very important. And for that reason, we've had a lot of stick, because there is an investment in northern Greece about mining. It's not a lignite case, it's a gold mining thing, which is in a touristic area. And we've had quite a lot of stick from the investment community. Why aren't you progressing with that investment? Because we think there are serious environmental issues that now are being into arbitration. I hope it will be resolved favorably, but we do make a stance on this. We're not in favor of whatever investment, irrespective of the general externalities in terms of society and the environment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I will now give the floor to Michael Fromm. Just a second. Michael, please.
Hello, good evening. I have a question. Isn't it so that the former Greek Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis resigned, and so Alexis Tsipras could make a deal that gave Greece cash in return for austerity measures and reforms? Wasn't this a swindle to the Greek citizens, or was Chancellor Merkel too strong for Alexis Tsipras? That's my critical question.
Okay, every government has faces a particular structure of the balance of power. In the first government, we attempted to change the nature of the program, and there came to be to a crunch point where we did what we could, and we felt that we couldn't go further. It was a difficult negotiation. I think the German government and some other northern countries were, I won't say happy to see us leave the Eurozone, but they were conceiving of leaving the Eurozone. Now, as a progressive, I have the following reason why I'm pro-European, because I fear that if we left the Eurozone, and if the Eurozone therefore began a disintegration, because a lot of economists think, I think actually the majority of economists think, that if one country had left the Eurozone, then a lot of other countries would have left, because that is what a monetary union is. It's an irrevocable promise never to devalue. Once you've devalued, or once country is left, then it's always open for another country. But why am I worried? Why was I worried about that? And why did I think we needed to make a compromise? Because I think that a dissolution of the Eurozone would not have been under progressive politics. I think it would have led to nationalistic politics. I think it would have led to the kind of politics we thought in the 1930s. You'll remember that the 1920s that led to the 1930s with competitive devaluations. The Greek government was the first Greek government, which between January and the September elections of 2015, was defeated in what it was attempting to do. And we accepted that. And what was honest, I think, about us is we took that compromise to the September elections. We didn't actually say after that renegotiation, well, we've just changed our views, we're now going to do something different that we promised you in January. We took that new deal to the Greek people. We said basically what I said at the beginning. I don't know if you were with us right from the beginning. We separated our strategy into what was agreed, what was to be negotiated, and what was outside the program. And we felt that we could promote a program which would get Greece out of the crisis and give people more confidence to be able to indulge in progressive politics, to give them greater confidence that with a left-wing government we would be much more socially sensitive to the needs of the people, and would negotiate for solutions that tried to mitigate some of the worst aspects of austerity and the program. Of course, we were judged on whether people agree with us in the 2019 election. But it is actually important. I mean, let me just give you one quick answer to your, and then let's stop there so I don't go on for too long. In the summer of 2015, where I was discussing whether the compromise were worth it or not, I met somebody from my hometown who said, Euclid, we don't need the left when it's full employment and growth is at 5% of GDP growing every year. If you say to me, well, you can't deal and you can't compromise and you can't help people like me, what need do I have of you? What do I have a need of you when it's good times? It's when it's difficult that you've got to dirty your hand and do what you can for people like me. I mean, he wasn't a very rich person at all, and I think that's so your question implies: was there a defeat? There was a defeat. Was that defeat? Was there a compromise that was workable? Could we make that compromise workable? Was the cost of not making that workable compromise even worse? That's the kind of questions that left-wing people and green people and centrist people, social democrats, have to discuss and see. I mean, obviously, we won't know for some time. You probably know the old joke that when Chou En-lai was asked what he thought of the French Revolution, he answered, "It's far too early to say." So we will see.
I would only, as you can imagine, that is a very tough question, often discussed in German public policy. I made myself the paper public, which was used in the critical Eurozone Eurogroup meeting in order to blackmail Greece out of the euro. So I received that paper from sources and I published it, and it was widely spread afterwards. And I must say, I rarely felt ashamed so strongly by the means the German government was using in order to put pressure on your government to accept whatever it wants. So still, I would say I agree with you that we have to try to do the most under the existing situation. We cannot simply act as if the existing structures do not exist. I would say, of course, there's also a certain responsibility by Greek politics that you couldn't get out of the crisis faster, but there's also a European responsibility, and this is often not recognized enough in our debate. And I don't think one should call that a swindle if you are pressured by someone. That I wouldn't agree with Michael. On the other hand, I would say perhaps it is a certain false impression given if you call for a special referendum, although you know that the power relations do not allow what you basically offer. So I was much more critical about that referendum and the possibility to vote there on something which was actually not on the table. So that I found more difficult.
I have a slight disagreement, Sven. The deal that was on the table that we took to the Greek people was considerably worse than the subsequent compromise. I mean, what was on the table in before the referendum was a deal that took us to September. The deal was discussed in May, June, which took us to September with no promise to discuss debt, with 3 reviews, and then to discuss a further program in September. So I think what we negotiated between July and August, I'm not saying it was the best compromise, and maybe we could have done better, who knows, but it was a better deal than what was rejected by the Greek people. There is no doubt in my mind about that.
I agree with you.
I think the referendum, sorry to interrupt, I think the referendum played a good role.
I don't deny that this was helpful. I would not even be able to judge it. As we all, also as European Parliament members, we are not in the negotiation room, so we cannot judge that fully. I can only say that perhaps the deal you got was not what the many Greek people thought they voted for, and that is, of course, that is causing the democratic problem. That it might have helped you, I wouldn't deny, and I think also that it's not to the Germans to judge that, because we were not able, as progressives in Germany, to stop Mr. Schäuble and others of blackmailing you. So that is therefore that is our part to take. I would now like to try to give the floor to Panagiotis Tsiantopoulos, but I'm not sure whether it works because he seems to have joined us only by telephone. Let's see whether he can speak. Hello?
I will try to do my very best and speak so that you can listen to what I say. I see that you are listening. So yes, I tried to introduce myself. My name is Panos Tsiantopoulos, living in Frankfurt. My parents came to Germany in 1960, working class. So I have a German Abitur and also a degree in Germany. I live in Germany and I love living here, but I also love my country. So good night, Herr Giegold. Kalispera, κύριε Tsakalotos. I have 3 questions actually. One to you, Sven, one to you, Euclid, and one to both of you. Let's start with the first question to you, Sven. I have the impression that consumption is based on income and income based on consumption. So we currently face the fact in Greece that we have less than 1 income per family, per household. What can Europe do to improve the financial situation besides giving some loans and saving some banks? Okay, second question to Euclid. What measures does Greece take to reduce the tax erosion so that high income people with high income do not move their money to strange places in the world? I refer to the Panama Papers. And a question to both of you. I have the impression that Greece is just kind of financial guinea pig, Versuchskaninchen, Pyramatozo. What is your impression?
Euclid.
So the first question was to you, Sven.
Okay, that's fine. So we have been demanding for a long time that it is not enough to stabilize the monetary system. So basically what we did with the bailout of the banks it was not the money for the banks, it was to save the euro and the monetary system. So, and obviously a lot of people profited from that who shouldn't have profited. So that is very clear. And the second part, to bring the Eurozone faster out of the crisis through investment and also stabilization of the income level of those who are most affected. All that was not done. So therefore, our current demand is to increase investment efforts and finance that through more coordinated European taxation. So that is what we as German Greens and European Greens call a Green New Deal. So investments into future sectors, in particular green sectors, and financing that with tax harmonization and progressive taxation in the future. This has not been done because so far we have no majority. Neither we have a majority in the Eurogroup for these sort of ideas, nor do we have a majority in the European Parliament. I have to recognize that this is where we stand. Nevertheless, we were able to make progress in the area of taxation. So very clearly in the last years, it has become more difficult to move your money into tax havens. And we have pushed a lot for this, and also some of the governments have made advances, and the European Commission is committed. But still, there's still too much money in these dark pools in the global tax haven sector, and we have clearly to step up the measures. And I also believe we need a minimum taxation rule in Europe, so a minimum tax rate which is applicable everywhere. So just north of Greece in Bulgaria, you pay 10% corporation tax rate. This is clearly an incentive and an unfair form of tax competition. And we have similar problems in Germany. I think everybody in Europe, with few exemptions, would be better off if we would tax mobile income effectively and use that for investment. What's your answer, Euclid?
So I agree nearly everything you said there, Sven. So I won't repeat it. I mean, what is really important about the Panama Papers is that it's not an issue of tax evasion. It was a legal system, and it's very important to the rise of social inequalities over the last 20, 30 years. The social inequalities, I mean, I just want to give figures just for German people and Greek people who listen to us, how much this social inequality has increased. I mean, in the 1970s, on the latest figures we had, the 0.1% of the richest Americans had 28 percentage points less wealth than the bottom 90%. And now, in 2016 or 15, maybe the last figures we have, the top 0.1%, not even 1%, the top 0.1% have the same amount as the bottom 90%. And so that has led to such inequalities. It's happened for two reasons. One is this legal tax avoidance. The second is the drive to reduce taxes through tax competition and other measures. And that has led, the Americans have a nice phrase for this, it's starve the beast. What do the Americans mean? You reduce taxes by being popular, and you say that reduced taxes will then increase investment and will have more revenues because of that, so it won't make any difference that it's lower taxes. That never works. You always have less revenues, and then what do? You cut social or ecological programs as a result, and that's why it's starve the beast. Yes, you don't go directly to hit social programs, you don't go directly to hit green programs. What you do is you cut taxes, eventually it leads to a deficit and an increased debt, and then you're forced to increase to decrease, to cut social spending and so on. So it really is a system that has led to the crisis. I remind people that the crisis in America happened with some of these bonds that were originally tied to the loans to the poorest people in America, Black Americans, working class white Americans, yeah, and who eventually couldn't pay the derivatives that were derived from these people's income. So inequality was also behind the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. So all the issues that the Panos, if I remember rightly, asked are actually really important. And that's why I replied before, so I won't repeat it, what the Greek government has been trying to do on the issue of tax evasion and tax avoidance and the voluntary disclosure initiatives and certain other things that we've been trying to do. But it really has to be dealt with at the European level. The point that Sven made about tax competition is completely unacceptable.
I would like to read you a question which is written in German, so I will try to translate it literally, which has been discussed a lot in Germany, and would be fascinating to have your views on this. So I tried to translate it. In Germany, all plans in order to create structures which lead to a financial transfer between European countries are seen usually quite critical, be it through Eurobonds or through a monetary fund or anything else. But in fact, Germany's existing structures are already being depleted, such as the deposit guarantee systems of the banks. And beyond that, German citizens may have to face that they are already sharing with other countries. Have we already reached a condition in which the large economic imbalances are covered by the Target 2 accounts in the central bank, which are not covered or guaranteed by anything. So basically, the question is there basically a form of transfer already being installed inside of the central bank system at the ECB? So how do you feel about this question?
The second part of the question is quite technical. It's wrong. There's a famous German economist who has been arguing about this, Hans-Werner Sinn, if I pronounced it right. It isn't correct that there isn't a transfer system through that, and I think the balance of academic economic opinion is in that direction. At the moment, the issues we're discussing within the Eurogroup does not include transfers. It is a discussion on whether we need stabilization mechanism. The French, for instance, think it should happen mostly through investment. The Italians, I'm just giving you an example, think it should happen mostly through unemployment insurance. But because of the balance of forces within the Eurogroup, these are being discussed without a fiscal transfer issue. And why isn't it? So what will happen is that some country that has a problem temporarily will get some help and then will pay back that help over a period of time. So it's not like the United States or Canadian, Australian budget, where there is a transfer element when Texas or Queensland or whatever has a problem. Now, the reason Northern European citizens think we shouldn't have a transfer system is understandable, but I think is wrong. A stabilization program, well, what is the usual argument? That there is a moral hazard with a stabilization program. That if there is a stabilization mechanism, not program, a stabilization mechanism, some countries will use it, will not be so interested in carrying out reforms or being fiscally sound and so on. So that's why there's a moral hazard. There's a moral hazard that a country like Greece or Portugal or Italy will not be so sensible in their fiscal policies if they know they will get compensation from Germany or Holland and so on. But that is basically wrong, because the stabilization policy works like an insurance scheme. And why, if I was going to insure your house, then, or your car, let me say, you won't get full compensation if it's stolen. Why? Because I want to ensure that Sven locks it, takes care to lock it at night, puts it in a garage if he's got a garage. So I give you some compensation, but I don't give you the full amount. So you have no incentive not to lock the car or to park it in a sensible place. The same thing works with the stabilization policy. In America, a state like Texas, if it's in a crisis, will get some support, but for every dollar it loses, it will get 28 cents, let's say, or 18 cents. So there's no incentive to actually create a crisis or not be sensible. It's not like you're being compensated for the whole amount. You're being compensated for a small amount. And what is the idea of the stabilization policy? That sometimes it will be Texas, another time it might be California, another time it might be New York. So we share the temporary risk of an asymmetric shock, that Germany has a shock that Greece doesn't, that Portugal has a shock that France doesn't have, and so on. What are Northern Europeans thinking? They're thinking, but Greece, Portugal, and Italy will always be the weak country. But that isn't a macroeconomic stabilization issue. That is an issue about convergence. That is an issue not about a temporary shock to your economy, where you have a recession in France that Italy doesn't have. This is another issue that Northern Europeans and neoliberals are worried about: convergence. Now, that is an issue about development policy, about structural funds, about how you get convergence. And to that, it has nothing, number one, it has nothing to do with stabilization policy. Number two, that is an issue Europeans have to discuss. Can you be in a monetary union where you have permanent divergence of economic performance? Most economists would say no. And part of the centrifugal forces in Europe at the moment, trying to tear it apart, the Le Pens of the world and the Wilders of the world and the Golden Dawns of the world, are using the regional inequality to break up the union. So Northern Europeans and even neoliberal Northern Europeans have to think about that. Do they want a Eurozone and a EU that has an economic convergence at the development level? And if they don't, then they must seriously think whether they prefer not to have European integration. My fear is, if that happens, then we will return to some very nasty politics indeed.
I would only like to second more or less what you were saying. So I agree that the analysis of the target 2 balance is a flawed one. The problem of Hans-Werner Sinn is that, of course, in the moment when the Eurozone collapses, the big question is who will pay for potential deficits. So that is a fair question. But by all his writings, he has written a whole book about it. He basically only reveals that he is very much concerned that the Eurozone will fall apart. And much of his publicity he did in Germany was actually targeted to arrive at that result. So basically he contributes, together with many others, to an open bill, which actually will never occur as long as we keep the Eurozone stable. So I would therefore suggest to invest more energy into making the Eurozone waterproof. And to this belongs, of course, a convergence program, which has been always there in Europe. We have always invested into structural funds. We have always invested also in the common agricultural policies. And I believe it should be worth more to invest in our common future to make that convergence happen. Beyond that, our party has always argued for the stabilization mechanisms, such as the unemployment scheme, which is basically functioning as you were describing it. The only trouble behind this is you can demonize a lot of positive proposals very easily as transfers. Even if it's factually not correct, it is very easy to do dirty politics in Germany. On the other hand, we have seen also in Greece examples that it was very easy to use populist arguments against Germany. So it's always easy to win votes by demonizing others, and this is what Europe Calling is about, to find solutions for which we can all agree with and make life better off for the majority of the people, rather than using arguments to demonizing others. And I think there we have a huge problem which we have in common. And our part in Germany is this false talk of a transfer union, while at the same time Germany has profited so much from the euro as it is at the moment. More than 100 billion we have saved only as a state in interest payments, and we are not ready to share basically a penny of it with anybody else, and that is quite a shame. But I could go on with this for long. I will rather give, if you allow, Minister, the floor to
just one addition to that. Just one very quick addition. I won't delay thing. Also, the Greek program in 2010 did save the northern banks. If Greece had gone under, So I think it's very important for respectable politicians of the left and the right and the centre and the Greens to actually explain that to the people. Thereby, if Greece didn't have that programme, a lot of German banks would have been very seriously in trouble. So in a sense, we transferred some our costs to the benefit of Northern Europe, French banks, Dutch banks, and German banks.
I would agree with this, and you can be assured that this explanation was done a lot. On the other hand, one has to say the banks have given out loans before, and with these loans, some consumption was being financed, and perhaps that was not sustainable and not properly watched. So therefore, it's not simply the banks. Behind the bad loans of the banks are also people who spend the money. So therefore, the things are more complicated, but we made that point very loudly, and that was accepted widely in the German public. I would say on that front, there was quite a lot of pedagogy. I would now like to try to give the floor to Dimitra Limperopoulou. It's not easy to pronounce. Dimitra. No. Your microphone seems to be disconnected. Some technological problems there. So I will then give the floor to my former colleague, and you certainly know him. Dimitra? My former colleague, Nikos Chrysogelos, his surname I was never able to pronounce. So Nikos, please, that's easier. So Dimitra and Nikos, both of you, the microphones are open. Well, while they are struggling.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Nikos.
Okay.
Good to hear you.
Hello. How are you, Sven? Dear Minister, it's interesting what you have said, but I would like to ask you. Now there is a problem that you implement a policy that is based on both austerity and heavy taxation. This is the first problem. And the second is that the model of development you discuss, it's the old-fashioned model because it is based on consumption, on drilling of oil, things like this. I have never heard about green transition, about a model that is modern and is ecological and is more social responsible. And what we hear in Greece is that big investments in tourism, but the old-fashioned model on pipelines for oil or natural gas. But this is not the way for the exit of the crisis.
Okay, let me take the questions then in the reverse order of what you said. It's just not the truth. The Greek government has changed, for instance, the structural fund money that we have already discussed, probably before you got online. Remarkably, as you said, that the Greek model of the before the pre-crisis period was based on a lot of big infrastructural projects. If you look at how much of the structural funds have gone to big in the last 2 years, it's been almost a reversal. The majority now going to small, medium-sized enterprises. It's going to very different areas, a wide range of areas, and it's just not the case that we're actually focusing on the areas that you've said. Obviously, tourism is going to be a big part of Greek development, but we haven't gone down the Costa del Sol, shall I say, model of the Spanish, of huge hotels and so on. And quite a lot of the new development money is in actually in investment projects in tourism, which are quite sensitive to their environment. It's also mercifully, I would say, because otherwise the pressure to do it would be very difficult to resist. It's actually what some kind of tourists want. Yes, they don't want these huge hotels with all-inclusive and so on. So there has been a diversification. I'm happy to send you some of the actual data on where the spending from structural fund money has been going over 2 years. Now, on the tax issue that we're overtaxed, it's half the truth. If you look at revenues as a percentage of GDP in Greece, we're roughly at the average. We're just about a tiny bit above the average of the EU. In fact, we're very close to the EU average and very close to Germany, by the way. But that doesn't mean there isn't a tax problem, because that tax is not evenly spread, it's not distributed properly. And I explained at the beginning of our discussion why that is the case. Because firstly, we had an absolute priority to deal with the humanitarian crisis, so that was very heavy on the expenditure demands, and it took us time to reduce tax evasion. And so now that there is, a better social program, the hospitals are working better, we have got money over the next 5 years to reduce taxes. And in fact, in the 5-year medium-term fiscal strategy, that we were allotted 3.5 billion euros for the reduction of the taxes. The government has made absolutely clear. We want to get out of the crisis, but we certainly don't want to return to the model of development of 2009. And there are some green ministers doing some very good work within our government. And as I said before, one of the areas is the agricultural minister and so on.
Yes. Then there is a question of Moritz Ortegel. Also, some German names are not clear how to pronounce them. In 2015 and 2016, I had the impression that the Greek Syriza government had no intention or strategy to build international anti-austerity alliances with Social Democrats or Greens. Instead, I saw a Greece versus Germany battle, at least in several media in Germany. Please comment on the process of building political alliances against austerity measures and measures in favor of sustainable eco-social growth. Thank you, Minister.
I mean, this is the media impression, and it's always works in a simplistic way. Greece versus Germany. From opposition times, when Syriza began to be a political force, we always made it clear that it was never Greece versus Germany. That's important to us. It's not important to us strategically, just tactically, not to annoy the German government. It's actually a strategic issue. The strategic issue is that we know that not all Germans are alike. They're not all the same social class. They don't all have the same social interests. We know that there are economic problems in Germany. There's social exclusion in Germany. There's people have poor jobs or poor prospects of improving, just like there is in Greece and other countries. So the issue of alliances has been very important for us from the beginning, especially since we decided we were never wanting to move out of the Eurozone, because we feared that would lead to reactionary politics. So we've always tried to build alliances, and Alexis Tsipras and myself have been going to Germany and to Spain and to Portugal, to France. Last year I was in Berlin, where there was an event with a German Green, a German SDP, and a German Die Linke person, where we had a discussion on many of the topics we've just been discussing, on the future of Europe, the relationship between Greece and Germany, and that I think went very well in Berlin. So we've always been interested in that, and it's absolutely critical. It's absolutely critical that if Europe is going to move in a progressive direction, and if it's going to block moving in a nationalistic, populist right-wing direction, that there are social movements and political alliances that are pressurizing for that.
I think Euclid, I see the number of participants, which was high and stable, going down slowly. I would like to collect the last questions and take them together, if you allow, so that we also can conclude. I see here now Martin Müller. Let's see what Martin Müller. Müller is a classical name, by the way. Is saying now. Just a second. Now, Martin, bitte schön. Martin? No. Okay, I will try Judith Bogner. Perhaps she is.
Yes, hello.
Ah,
hello. Can you hear?
Yeah, we hear you.
Hi there. Hi there. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Two questions for you, Sven, and for the Minister. First question, and I apologize, I only joined the conference a short while ago, so I wasn't able to catch up on all your other detailed questions. But my concern is with SMEs in Greece. I have a number of business partners in Greece, and I've been seeing for the last 2 years how they've been suffering the high tax rates for small companies. How can you justify that small companies in Greece have among the highest taxation in the OECD, just below Germany's 29.8%? Every time a small business shuts down, the families lose providers, jobs, a whole network suffers. When are you aiming to provide for a lower tax rate to make life easier on SMEs and small businesses, which are the driving force across Europe, which is why France taxes small businesses at 15%. Ireland offers 3 tax years unless the business makes more than a certain amount. The UK only has a VAT rate above when a small business makes more than £80,000. So when do you think you can provide for a lower, more sustainable tax rate for small businesses in Greece, Minister?
Thank you for the question. Are you having any affiliations?
Well, I'm a business owner myself. I'm a Green Party member, and my heart really goes out to some of my friends and business partners in Greece who are desperately hanging on and every other month thinking of having to shut down.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We will get to it very soon. And I see here Georgios Chondros. Georgios, I'm sure Euclid knows you if he could recognize you despite of my horrible pronunciation. Georgios. Georgios? No. That doesn't work. Okay, so I have 2 written questions I would still like to read. Not everybody could, we had too many questions for everyone to be read, but I would like to read at least 2 of them. And one is where I'm not sure that you can truly openly answer them, but I will. I have also asked myself very often that question, and it's from Paris, from Arnaud Chevalier, Le Chevalier, and he's writing the following. And what about the scandalous privatization of Greek airports, which has benefited a German company with the land, so with the state, as a main shareholder? So that is one question from Arnaud. And we have another question from Jörg Pries, and he's asking the following. Yes. What about the low end of taxpayers, which have been hit hardest by the crisis? Are there any tools or governance measures to improve their financial situation? So, in fact, a similar question as the one asked by Judith Bogner. So I have to excuse to everybody who didn't manage to answer their question, but there was also one very practical one. And this was, Minister, you mentioned your contribution to the European Court of Auditors. Is it possible to share this contribution, or is it one which was done in private to the authority? One participant is asking for your written contribution to that report. So perhaps you want to try to answer these questions, and thanks already for participating.
You're more than welcome. It's been a pleasure. What I told the European Court of Auditors, I think is in private, and they've taken it into account in their own report, and I don't think that is for general publication, because it involves not secret but sensitive issues that I wouldn't like to be misinterpreted. The issue about the taxation, I think I have covered. Unfortunately, the small businesswoman missed the beginning. I would say, though, apart from the 3.5 billion that I've said we've allowed for tax reductions over the following the future 5 years, which I've already explained and why it didn't happen earlier, so I won't repeat the argument. We have been doing a lot to deal with the over-indebted small, medium-sized enterprises, and there is serious work going to be done on restructuring their loans to be able to breathe again. So that's an issue that we haven't touched upon, which I think is important. Greece has a big issue with non-performing loans, and I think the space of all performing loans are very important for Greece. Is, as the business person said, is very important, is this envelope of small, medium-sized enterprises, and a lot of work has been done for the banks to actually engage seriously in a restructuring program and not be very short-termist in this. What I mean by short-termism is see what they can get out. Short-termism is what Richard Gere was in Pretty Woman before he became a new man under the influence of Julia Roberts. Long-term is, in other words, asset stripping. Long-term is trying to deal seriously with the problem of the firm, to be able to put it on its own feet with a proper business plan and so on. So there are lots of different things going on, including, apart from the tax cuts coming up, the shift in direction of the structural fund resources that we get from Europe. On the question of the lower half, the poorest section, I wasn't asked about that, and maybe I should have said more on my own back, but that's really has been our concentration. We had the humanitarian crisis as the #1 priority of the Greek government, given the crisis we dealt with, and that's why there's been some wonderful work done by the Ministry of Health in free healthcare, even for people who are uninsured, in trying to set up a framework for primary healthcare, so that not everybody goes to the hospital, increasing the number of doctors. But we've done a lot of things about having a social solidarity income for people at the very lowest end of the income scale. So there has been a lot of initiatives to help them. Most of these people that the question are asked are not paying taxes, so you can't help it through tax credits, because they're not even paying taxes. So we've had to deal with a lot of other issues. It's also been not just a government issue. There's been a very important social solidarity movement, which has been helping people. So there has been a sort of active support, and that's been one of the good things of the crisis, of people sort of getting together and organizing and helping each other out, which is very important for progressive politics in general, but of course it's very important even more for the people needing the social help. Did I forget any of the 4 questions? I don't think so. Maybe. I have a feeling there was one I didn't answer. Sorry?
The airports.
The airports, the private. Yes, I thought the whole privatization question. Obviously, the deal with the creditors was, if you want debt relief, that you must do your share. They call it burden sharing, and part of that is the privatization program, where the proceeds go to the creditors. we also have a privatization and investment funds where half the proceeds of either sales or leases or other ways of increasing value goes to the Greek economy through investment, and half goes to the creditors. I wouldn't say actually that the Fraport is the most controversial investment privatization, in the sense that there are a lot of airports that needed a lot of money, a lot of investment to help upgrade them. So there are, I would say, there were privatizations that were more difficult than the Fraport one. I think that this allows, this privatization does actually allow the regional, because so that your German listeners are in touch. This is mostly for regional airports, not the big airports of Athens and so on. And it does come with a lot of investment, which hopefully will be helpful for airports. What the Greek government has done is it's compromised in doing some privatizations, but what it negotiated was a privatization and investment fund, which was very different from the previous situation that we reached, both in terms that this privatization investment fund is not necessary for privatization, so you can actually use those assets in a more innovative way by leasing them or doing joint ventures and so on, and keeping the assets for the Greek state, and also negotiating that any increase in the value from whatever action you take, half goes back into the Greek economy as an investment. It's not an ideal situation, but that is what we've negotiated and able to do. So I'd like to thank all the people for their questions, and I hope the answers and the discussion from both you and I were interesting.
Well, thank you very much for the openness and for accepting to discuss with the citizens here. I would welcome very much also the civilized level of all the questions, even if they were critical. And this is exactly the debate we need to have. And I think that we have seen a lot that big lobbies manage to use the European space to pursue their interests. We have to learn that ordinary citizens use the public space in Europe more often in order to win some of these battles over taxation, over unfair social policies, greening the economy, and renewing our economic model so that it benefits actually future generations and the poorer sections of society. I want to thank you, Minister, for what you've been doing, and we see each other back in Brussels. Thank you also to everybody who listened and participated. Obviously, that will not be the last edition of Europe Calling. We will continue with this format, and in order to bring Europe closer to the citizens and keep Europe as a project which is deeply needed in order to avoid a new wave of nationalisms and competition between the peoples in Europe. And obviously, we know Europe is far from being perfect, but the alternative of the old conflicts is much worse. And I think it is really up to critical civil society and progressives to take over the public space in Europe, as we did in many of the nation states, to bring a social and environmental model. And the battle is not yet won, which direction Europe will take. But one thing is for sure, I think we have to cross borders in order to win some of these debates. And I wish you well and a calm Christmas without any signs of crisis. And all the best also to all the participants, and to our busy translator, Tasha, and also to my staff, Max, who made all this happen. Thank you very much. Bye-bye and Merry Christmas.
Bye, everybody.